Asheville wasn't on most maps anymore. The town sat cradled in a decaying valley where the Appalachians dipped like a breath held too long. Trees grew thick here, too thick. The sun struggled to cut through the crooked spines of pines and oaks that tangled overhead like a cage. Locals said the soil was too black, too wet, like it remembered things, like it kept them. On a cloudy Tuesday in late September, the first wound was opened. The crew came in early, hauling rusted yellow machines onto the old Petrie farm lot. 70 acres of overgrowth that hadn't been touched in a generation. A Walmart was coming, or maybe just a bigger gas station. No one could keep the rumors straight. What mattered was, for the first time in decades, the land was being dug up. The backhoe tore through vine and rock until it struck something solid beneath a patch of brittle grass. Not stone, not metal, something else. The operator, a man named Doug Castle, leaned out of the cab, frowning at the strange, matte surface below. It wasn't concrete. It wasn't natural. The color was wrong. A deep, soot-black slab with carvings so fine and shallow they seemed to shift when the eye lingered. He ratioed it. Then he made a mistake. Doug climbed down, boots crunching dead leaves and shattered root. He squatted and brushed dirt away with his calloused hands. The carving stretched wide, a ring of symbols he didn't recognize, surrounding a center circle that almost looked recessed, like a bowl. He touched it, and the ground whispered. Doug jerked his hand back, his breath clouded in the sudden cold. The air had changed, still, pressurized. He looked around, suddenly unsure if he was alone. Then he noticed the smell, something like burnt sugar and rot. Later, no one could find Doug Castle, not his truck, not his tools, not his radio. Only a single boot, sliced open down the sole, sitting by the slab like it had been placed there on purpose. By nightfall, the crew had packed up and left. The slab remained. Clara Wren didn't want to come back to Asheville, but her mother's voice had trembled on the phone, and guilt was an anchor she never managed to cut loose. The town hadn't changed much. The same boarded-up diners, same crooked telephone poles, same silences that stretched too long between conversations. The house smelled like mothballs and vinegar, and her mother, now just a shell in a wheelchair, watched her with cloudy, wet eyes that seemed to always be seeing something over Clara's shoulder. "They've started it," her mother rasped the second night, as Clara changed her linens. "I felt it when they broke the seal." Clara froze. "What seal?" Her mother shook her head, her tongue pushed against her teeth like she wanted to say something else, but couldn't or shouldn't. Instead, she whispered, "They'll take the eyes first. That's how they see again." Clara didn't sleep that night. The next day, the woods behind the Petrie lot were alive with sound. Crows screamed without pause from the trees. Dogs howled, refusing to cross the property line. Reverend Gray stood at the edge of the site, watching from behind thick glasses. He carried a worn black Bible tucked under one arm and muttered prayers in a tongue older than Latin. He recognized the slab. He'd seen sketches once, long ago, hidden in a leather-bound journal kept beneath a false floor in a seminary vault. The language wasn't human. The rite it described had only been used once, in Kavrak, a village that had vanished in Syria in 1623. No survivors, only ash, and something still walking, they said, long after the fires. Jonah swallowed and began to pray louder. The trees didn't move. The wind didn't blow. But he swore something deep in the dark woods had just opened its eyes. That night, the dreams began. In houses across Asheville, people twisted in their sleep, moaning, convulsing, weeping. They dreamed of blood-soaked roots winding through the town's foundations, of mouths opening beneath the dirt, of red eyes blinking behind the walls. And in every dream, a voice whispered, "It's time." By morning, Asheville had changed. Something about the town felt different. The air was heavier. The light didn't quite fall the same way. The birdsong had gone silent. Clara noticed it as soon as she stepped outside to fetch the paper. The mist lingered too long, clinging to the ground like it was hiding something underneath. The trees across the street bent just slightly in her direction, though the wind was still. She told herself it was nothing, but her mother, slumped in her wheelchair by the front window, stared out with blank, terrified eyes. "They're watching from the woods," she muttered. "They never blink." Inside the house, Clara poured coffee with shaky hands. She hadn't slept. All night long, the house had creaked in odd rhythms. Not from age, not from settling. No, it had paced, like something walking the halls just beyond her bedroom door. And there were whispers. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. Murmuring, chanting, always just out of reach, as if the walls were remembering voices from long ago. Voices that weren't hers. Voices that didn't belong. At the same hour across town, Deputy Nate Carver stepped onto the porch of the McIntyre residence. The mail had piled up. No answer to calls. Neighbors said the family, husband, wife, and 2 daughters, hadn't been seen since Sunday. He knocked again. Nothing. Drawing his sidearm, Nate pushed the door open. The air inside was wrong. Not just stale. It was dead. The furniture sat undisturbed. Plates remained on the kitchen table. Forks still spearing half-eaten sausages. There were no signs of struggle. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. But the mirrors were covered. Every last one. Bedsheets, towels, cardboard taped edge to edge. Even the microwave door had been blacked out with electrical tape. Nate's breath caught. On the hallway wall, someone had scrawled 3 words in something black and tar-like, thick and glistening. "He sees again." A low humming began. Nate spun toward it, heart pounding. It was coming from the basement. In the woods, the hollowed ones gathered. They wore no robes, They bore no sigils. They looked like farmers, retirees, shopkeepers. The old blood ran in them, passed through the generations in whispers and burnt offerings. Tonight they would begin. At the base of an ancient sycamore tree, its bark twisted into faces no one had carved, they placed a small wooden idol. It had no eyes, only a yawning mouth and horns that spiraled like roots digging downward. The eldest among them, Meryl Greaves, stepped forward and began to chant. Her voice cracked at first, then deepened, not with strength, but with something else, something beneath her voice. The idol shuddered. Far beneath the earth, something turned in its sleep. Back at the Wren house, Clara stood in her childhood bedroom staring at her reflection. The mirror had begun to ripple. It was subtle at first, just a quiver in the glass. Then the image changed. She was still there, but not alone. Behind her stood a figure, tall and black-eyed, grinning with a mouth that stretched too wide. Its fingers twitched, clawed and long, resting gently on her shoulders. She turned around. Nothing. She looked back at the mirror. The figure was gone, but written in condensation on the glass were the words, "Say the name." And beneath the town of Asheville, where the bones of the valley remembered what had been buried, something ancient began to wake. The ritual had begun, and the hollowing had returned. The forest behind Asheville was older than the town, older than the state, older than memory. Even the native tribes had called it cursed, warning settlers with carved symbols on tree trunks that no one alive could translate. But settlers came anyway, and they paid. They called the stretch of land Griever's Hollow, though no one remembered why. Some said a village once stood there and burned to ash. Others whispered of a priest who went mad, cutting out the tongues of his congregation before walking into the trees and never returning. But the oldest secret was the sycamore. Meryl Greaves had lived through 4 husbands and 2 house fires, and she had buried them all with her own 2 hands. Her voice shook in town, but in the hollow, among the trees and the others, she became something else, something whole, something ancient. The idol at the base of the sycamore pulsed now, a soft beat like a second heartbeat beneath the moss. Around it, a crude circle had been carved into the dirt, filled with ash, salt, and the blood of a goat taken 2 nights before. Meryl turned to the others. 3 offerings have been made, she said. The pact is warm. The seal is undone. He will return when the 4th is claimed. She knelt, hands trembling as she traced a spiral symbol into the bark of the sycamore with a knife carved from obsidian. The bark bled, thick and black. It ran down the trunk, pooling around the idol's base. The ground hummed. Leaves shook, though no wind stirred. "He waits behind the veil," Meryl whispered, "and he is hungry." Clara Wren didn't believe in curses or demons or pacts made in blood, but she believed in patterns, and something in Asheville was following one. She spent most of the night researching the McIntyre disappearance, the one her mother had cryptically mentioned before retreating into silence again. It wasn't just them. Families had vanished before in Asheville. 1942 and 1911 and 1876. Always in groups of 4, and always in September, and always near the woods. There were barely any records, a few faded articles, some yellowed photographs, but Clara noticed the same phrase popping up in scribbled police notes and archived journals. Eyes first. Always the eyes. She closed her laptop and leaned toward her window. Something was watching her from the tree line. Deputy Nate Carver didn't tell anyone about what he had found in the McIntyre basement. He didn't say how the walls had been stripped to the beams, carved top to bottom with symbols he couldn't explain. He didn't mention the smell, something between burning hair and wet soil. And he certainly didn't report the thing he saw crouched in the corner. It had bones where its eyes should have been. And when it moved, the entire room dropped in temperature, like the air itself recoiled from its presence. But worst of all was what it said. It didn't speak loud. It didn't need to. "You carry it too," the voice echoed in his head. "You're one of mine." Nate hadn't fired his gun. He didn't run. He simply walked out, locking the door behind him. And then he vomited in the driveway. Now he sat in his cruiser, parked at the edge of the Petrie lot, staring at the slab. A half a dozen blackbirds circled overhead in slow, perfect loops, never landing, never cawing, just circling. The slab had cracked. From its center, a thin fracture now extended outward like a spider web. And in that crack, something moved. In the basement of the Asheville church, Reverend Gray lit a single candle. He'd pulled the old book from its hidden compartment beneath the altar. Its pages were vellum, its ink thick, encrusted with iron. The language was pre-Sumerian. The drawings were of rites no Christian man should ever speak aloud. But he had no choice. The creature rising in Asheville had a name, one spoken only in broken syllables and bloodied teeth. Azael Korith, the devourer of innocence, the hollowed one, the demon prince who had once walked among the living, wearing the faces of those it consumed, the one who promised paradise in exchange for flesh and gave nothing but ruin. Jonah dipped his fingers into the wax and carved the first warding rune onto the floor. It wouldn't stop what was coming, but it might slow it down. By midnight, the fourth family had vanished. No broken locks, no bodies, just silence and eyes drawn in blood all over the house. And in Griever's Hollow, the idol opened its mouth. It breathed, and the trees leaned inward to listen. The air in Asheville was changing. It clung to skin like oil. It tasted metallic. And for the first time in decades, the townsfolk stopped meeting each other's eyes. It wasn't conscious. It was instinct. The kind that remembered the cave before the fire. The kind that whispered, "Don't look, don't see, don't be seen." The McIntyre house remained under silent watch, its mirrors still blacked out, the tar-scrawled words still wet on the walls. No one had the courage to tear it down, not even Nate. Clara sat at her mother's bedside, clutching the edges of her sweater as her mother hummed something tuneless and low. Her lips moved, repeating the same fragmented words over and over. In the grove beneath the root, call 'em up, but pay the toll. Eyes are keys, eyes are doors. Claire squeezed her hand. Mom, what does that mean? Who's he? Her mother slowly turned her head, eyes wide, pupils blown black as ink. You wore your father's face once, but not his voice. Clara recoiled. Her father had died when she was 7. A car accident. Open casket. She remembered her mother sobbing over the coffin. She remembered the smell of flowers and formaldehyde. But now, a fracture split open in that memory, jagged and sharp. Her father's eyes hadn't looked right. They hadn't blinked, not once. Elsewhere in the home of the hollowed ones, candles flickered in a perfect circle around a boy no older than 12. He knelt at the center, hands bound with braided hair, eyes stitched shut with fishing line. He didn't scream. He didn't move. Only when the blood began to pool beneath his knees did he speak. He's in the roots. He walks in shadow. He speaks your names in the dark. The members of the circle bowed their heads. The blood spiraled toward the center of the room, as if pulled by gravity. The boy's body jerked forward once, then twice, and he fell silent. The line holding his eyelids snapped, and when his eyes opened, they were no longer his. Deputy Nate Carver hadn't told anyone about the missing families, but the walls of his home were covered in maps, pins, and string. A desperate web of disappearances, dates, symbols, and something older carved into the wallpaper by his own fingernails. The taken don't stay gone. He didn't remember writing it, but he woke to it every morning. He heard them now, the ones who had vanished. Their voices whispered through the pipes at night. They called him by name. They told him things. She knows. Clara sees it now. She's the 5th. The hollowing needs 5. Nate loaded his shotgun. He didn't know who to protect anymore. Only that he had waited too long. At Asheville Elementary, a little girl named Sadie Minter drew a picture during art class. She didn't speak, and she didn't blink. She simply filled her paper with black crayon, pressing until the wax snapped and her fingers bled. The drawing showed her house, with 4 stick figures outside. One stood apart, taller, faceless, and horned. Its hands reached toward the others, and above it, she wrote in red marker, I heard him under my bed last night. He said he's hungry. That night, Clara's lights flickered. Her mother was still, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-breath. Outside, dogs barked and then fell silent. The air shifted. She heard it again, from the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from inside the mirror. A voice like stone grinding teeth Say my name." The glass rippled again. Behind her reflection, the figure returned. Closer this time. Its smile split vertically from chin to sternum, revealing rows of obsidian teeth. "Say my name." And somehow, Clara knew it now. The word hung at the edge of her lips. Not a word, really. A curse. A hole in language. Something her ancestors had buried beneath language. Azael Karith. As the name escaped her lips, the house shuddered. Every mirror cracked. Every window went black. And her mother screamed a final time. Not in fear, but in worship. He walks again. Deep in Griever's Hollow, the sycamore split down the center with a sound like thunder. A figure emerged from the roots, tall, eyeless, and horned, draped in centuries of shadow. And across Asheville, every person who had ever been taken, dead or vanished, opened their eyes once more. Thank you guys so much for your support on this new video and new channel. Please like it, share it around, and subscribe to both Kody's Creepies and of course my main channel, Mystery Archives. There's many more to come, and catch part 2 of this story next week. And take care.